G'day guys, welcome to another historical video on My Blue Heaven. I'm in Yarraville, the Yarraville Gardens and Hamner Reserve, which used to be the former home ground of the Seddon Football Club. I'm starting here in these beautiful gardens and I haven't planned this too well. It's Sunday morning and there's people everywhere. There's some type of running event on. There's a real carnival atmosphere down here. I found a relatively quiet spot on this really picturesque ground. I remember when football was played here back in the day in the Western Region Football League. The Seddon club were particularly strong. They won grand finals in 91 and 92, and then they fell on hard times like a lot of teams do, and they merged with Yarraville, who play at the Yarraville Oval, and that's where I want to go today. And I want to talk about the year of 1942, which, what's that? It's 84, 85 years ago. It's a long time ago. Such a significant year in the history of our game in the VFL back then. And just doing research on that year and the significance of the ground that I'm going to visit today in this video is kind of mind-blowing, really, to think that at the peak of World War II in 1942, the VFL was in such a precarious position whether it would actually go ahead, considering how many VFL players were going off to war, and Geelong didn't realise that Geelong didn't participate in the VFL in 1942 and 1943, so it was only a 11-team competition. But there are two grounds, the Yarraville Football Oval and Toorak Park, almost became lifesavers of the VFL competition because there were a number of established grounds, the Lakeside Oval, the Junction Oval, the MCG, the Western Oval, were taken over by the Army. So the VFL had to find, I suppose, grounds that could cope with crowds, one, and that would also be suitable for hosting top competition of football. And that's exactly what happened in 1942. Footscray were kicked off the Western Oval, taken over by the Army, so they had to move a kilometre down the road and play all their home games in 1942 at the Yarraville Oval. And the same with a number of other clubs who had to go to the Toorak Park. And for 1 year only, the Yarraville Oval became somewhat of a hero in the competition. And an amazing fact and stat when I was doing this research was two legends of the VFL/AFL, two legends of their respective club, Footscray and Seddon, actually debuted together on the quaint Yarraville Oval in round 2 of 1942. And that is arguably two of the greatest ever players in Bill Hutchinson for Seddon and Charlie Sutton for Footscray, debuted against each other on the Yarraville Oval in 1942. As I said, there are people everywhere here. I don't like crowds, particularly trying to do a video, and I have not planned this at all well. And if I can get through this section of the video here in the Yarraville Gardens, I reckon I've done pretty well. For those of you who are kind of unfamiliar with Yarraville, if you're not from Melbourne or Victoria, it is very much was a working class suburb of Melbourne, particularly back in 1942. But since then, over probably the last 25 years, really, it's grown into being one of the what's the word I want to use? One of the trendiest suburbs here in the western suburbs. There's this sort of like strip from Footscray right the way down Williamstown Road, through Yarraville, Spotswood, Newport into Williamstown, which is, I suppose, the places, if you've got some money, you want to live. It's about 9.5 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD, and it's just at the foot of the Westgate Bridge. And I think I looked at the median house prices here in Yarraville now, something like 1.2 million. A lot of professionals, a lot of young families, and a lot of history here in Yarraville. Nothing sacred, is it? This is, what will they think of next? Hotel Mexico here in Yarraville, once the commercial hotel. Geez, this has had some changes over the last, say, 25, 30 years. It kind of feels like it is just hanging on by the skin of its teeth. This once great pub. Here, I wouldn't say in the heart of Yarraville. It's on the corner of a very busy road, Whitehall Street. There's cars flying up and down here. It's the industrial section of Yarraville. And the reason why I am here is because I had no idea. I knew Charlie Sutton, the great Charlie Sutton, who was the captain coach of Footscray's first ever premiership in 1954. What a feat that was. Playing coach. No wonder the Western Bulldogs' best and fairest is now named after Charlie Sutton. But he ran this establishment here back in the late 1960s into the 1970s. In fact, when he came back to coach and took over from Ted Whitten in the late 1960s for a couple of years, he had to give it away because he was running this pub here. And back in the early 1970s, it was known as the Sutton's Hotel. Imagine the stories told in this place now, the awfully named Hotel Mexico. Okay, I'm at the Yarraville Oval here on Williamstown Road. The thing that strikes me about this ground, and we are talking about the 1942 season where 7 VFL games were played on this ground, including that historic game in round 2 of that year where both Charlie Sutton and Bill Hutchinson debuted against each other. Sutton for Footscray and Hutchinson for Seddon, and they both go on to be legends of their football club. Not much has changed here. It's kept its charm. You know, like it's, other than maybe the terraces, which are now grass, there's some trees, the size of the ground, the grandstand is pretty much untouched. It's got the heritage listed grandstand, which is unique. It was built in 2 parts. If you look at the aerial shots from 1925, you can see that only one part of the grandstand had been built, and it's on quite a different angle, and I'll get to that shortly, why that is the case. And then in 1950, the second section of the grandstand was built. It's like a V-shaped. Yeah, I mean, when this ground was used for that season, because Footscray were kicked off their own ground, the Western Oval, it would have been pretty much what it looks like today. They were like hard men who would have played on this ground. I think in that game where Hutchinson and Sutton debuted, there was 10,000 people here. I think the biggest crowd in those 7 games was 16,000. Essendon ended up winning the grand final that year. And in that round 2 game, it was a really close game, 92-88 in favour of Essendon. So they got the chocolates by 4 points. And Footscray would end up going on to play in the first semi-final, or it might have been the second semi-final actually, which was an elimination final. They were eliminated. And then Essendon went on to win the grand final, which Bill Hutchinson played in. But this ground, like Toorak Park, it saved the competition. Now, up until 1942, this was the home of the Yarraville Football Club, who participated in the Victorian Football Association, the VFA. Now, the VFA competition during the war went into recess for 5 years, so that meant this ground became available. And then the Yarraville Football Club, in terms of being part of the VFA, I think they lasted up until around about 1983. And now it's the home of Yarraville in the Western Region Football League. But yeah, quite a amazing history here at this ground. All right, this is the W. Pedley stand, heritage listed, and an unusual shape. It's like a V. And this section here, okay, it is obviously on an angle, and so is this section here. This was the first section built in about 1925. Then they built the second section in 1940, just before 1942, obviously, when Footscray came here to play for that season as their home ground. Now, if you look at the aerial shots, I try to work out why from some of those aerial shots that there's only one section of the ground, and it is kind of on a weird angle and facing this way, considering that the goals at this ground, okay, traditionally, when it would have been played here in 1942, were down there and also down that way, is because this ground used to be, okay, before 1925, the goals used to be here, right in front of this section here. And the other goals were down, right down that section down there where the new electronic scoreboard is, in front of that grassed hill. And it would have been a very, very small ground back then. I'm still blown away to think that two legends of our game debuted against each other on this ground in 1942, not at the Western Oval, not at Windy Hill, not at the MCG, but here at the Yarraville Oval. And to think there was only 7 games played here in that year. I mean, it sort of blows my mind that both of those players would have ran out here and then go on to forge just unbelievable careers. And to think, and another interesting fact, guys, about that game in round 2, I mean, Sutton came across from Spotswood, and Bill Hutchinson was a local boy from West Meadows near Essendon. Sutton was 19 and Hutchinson was 18. Billy Hutchinson was actually not meant to play in that game. He was an emergency. And Les Grigg, who I don't know anything about, mind you, was a layout, meaning that Bill Hutchinson came in and played in that game. And I'm not going to go through stats about those two players, but we know that, the best and fairest is named, the Footscray best and fairest is named after Charlie Sutton. We know that he captain coached their first ever premiership team. We know that Bill Hutchinson, he won back-to-back Brownlow medals in 52 and 53, and he played, how many games did Bill Hutchinson actually play? He played 290 games, kicked 496 goals. He was a 4-time premiership player and 7-time best and fairest winner for the Seddon Football Club, and he played his first ever game here at the forgotten Yarraville Oval. Incredible. You can see the primary school just behind me here at the Yarraville Oval. That's always been there, but not that. not that modern building. They knocked the old one down, as they usually do. I'm not quite sure, because it would have been, I think if they'd kept it, it would have been heritage listed. Anyway, as I wander around the ground, the other significant game in that year of 1942, during the war, when this ground was used just for 1 year, because Footscray had to play their games here, was a round 12 game with the biggest crowd, a VFL crowd of 15,000 turned up to see a very, very high scoring affair. Footscray defeated Richmond by 2 points, 129 to 107. And what's significant about that game in 1942 was the great Jack Dyer played in that game against first-year player Charlie Sutton. Richmond would go on to play Seddon in the grand final that year, and obviously Seddon won. Great times. The biggest crowd ever here, though, was in 1940 in a VFA game. 18,000 fans turned up to watch the great Ron Todd play his first ever game for Williamstown. Was a great goal kicker for Collingwood, came to Williamstown, ended up being a legend, played his first game here, Williamstown versus Yarraville, and there were 18,000 that packed this ground on that day. Something tells me that this skateboard rink, or whatever you call it, wasn't here in 1942. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't here in 1942 when Charlie Sutton and Bill Hutchinson played their first game here at the Yarraville Oval. But I reckon if I just take a look behind the goals here, where there would have been a terrace, maybe, just maybe, this retaining wall, I might be wrong. I'd love to think that it's original. Maybe it's not. It looks original. Bluestone and rocks could have been here. All right, back. Okay, in 1942. Just have a look at it there. At the Yarraville Oval. They look pretty old, don't they? They look pretty old. It's starting to rain, which is probably a good time to finish. It's been quite a mild and nice morning to record this video. I hope you've enjoyed another trip down memory lane, so to speak. 1942 of the VFL season and the impact the Yarraville Oval had on that season. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'm going to see a movie here at the Great Sun Theatre here in Yarraville. I'm going to meet up with my son. We're going to go watch Predator. I highly recommend it. Not Predator, but the Sun Theatre. There's unbelievable restaurants and cafes here in Yarraville. Get a bite to eat. What I will do, though, to finish off this video, when I was researching old photos of Yarraville, there's not a lot online. And as you know, I love my then-now comparisons. So the earlier the photos of a particular area, the better. And there wasn't a lot on the ground, if I'm brutally honest, particularly from 1942. But there were a few photos from Yarraville, you know, back from the early part of the 20th century. And these three photos in particular, I just imagine, you know, these men hovering out the front of the railway hotel, crossing the railway line, walking. They've got like a determination on their faces. Maybe they are heading to the Yarraville Oval in 1942 to watch Charlie Sutton and Bill Hutchinson make their debut. Hope you enjoyed.